So, our first talk this afternoon is going to be MIshka Lessnau, who will be talking on what is the meaning of divination. MIshka grew up in a family where things of a psychical nature were just a part of who the family was. MIshka and her brothers could speak to each other and their parents about their experiences without any fear of being ridiculed. Her parents and both of her grandfathers had grown up with such experiences. Indeed, her Polish grandfather was someone to whom people would go in search of guidance, much as her Scottish mother was too. Following and trusting one's own intuition is what's important, but sometimes the additional use of mystical tools, such as tarot, runes, and other oracles, can add credence for an inquirer during a consultation. That, and a strong sense of responsibility and respect towards each other, is paramount. MIshka will be talking on the meaning of divination. We could say that divination or divine intervention is fate, coincidence, psychic ability, and several other expressions that some people decry by saying there's no such thing as that. However, for MIshka, she uses descriptive words and thinks that it helps others to understand where you're coming from when you include such words or expressions in order to get your points across. So, ladies and gentlemen, the first session of the afternoon, MIshka Lessnau, what is the meaning of divination? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd forgotten what I'd written for the programme, so it's most of my first wee paragraph here, and I'm afraid I have to use my iPad to keep myself right. So I hope you'll excuse me for doing this. Well, as Gordon said, I was born into a psychic family. You know, it was quite a natural thing for people to have experiences. So we could speak about our experiences and nobody was going to ridicule us in the family or in the friendship group. I was going to say, for me, I believe that it could be said that divination or divine intervention is fate, coincidence, psychic ability, and several other expressions that some people dismiss, as Gordon said there. So I like descriptive words, and I like to think that it helps others to understand where you're coming from when you include such expressions in order to get your point across. So that's why I use them. Having explained that, I'd like to tell you about some of the things that have happened to me, seemingly out with my control, but which convince me of an inexplicable factor and which, at the end of the day, hold meaning for me forever after. That's the pictures of my grandfathers and my grandmothers, Scottish ones and the Polish ones, my dad, who was Polish, and my mum, who was Scottish, but looked more foreign than my dad did. Anyway, to me, the divination seems to be part of our readily acknowledged human nature, but just like our other senses, smell, taste, touch, sight, and sound, as individuals, we each have those senses in varying degrees. Indeed, some of us do not have the use of some of these senses at all. However, if we become aware that we do have this seemingly psychic sense of divination, and we react when our awareness tells us to, then for me, it stands to reason as to why it's known as our sixth sense or intuition. If tuition means a form of teaching which comes from another being who is deemed knowledgeable in that subject and therefore capable of imparting that knowledge to others, then intuition must relate to what one recognizes as coming through oneself without a perceptible human being or force delivering that knowledge to them. And as such, it has to be natural and acquired within that self. For example, I do choose to use the word coincidence to describe a certain set of circumstances, whereas other people will say to me there's no such thing. So I ask them what word would they use to describe such an event, and they invariably say synchronicity or serendipity, which being much more recent words, historically speaking, don't hold or convey the same meaning for me as coincidence does, since it's what I've grown up with. I need to take a drink of water, sorry. Very thirsty. Anyway, this to me is why we need to be true to ourselves and use the terminology that we're comfortable with the different areas of our lives, because that in itself is communication, whether psychical or otherwise. And if we cannot explain it in terms of our own understanding, then the message is likely to be lost and irretrievable for future reference. Right. That's an image of an angel therapy oracle card and Celtic brooch. During a week in August 2010, my friend Liz was back from Australia and only had a week's visit in Scotland, during which she wanted to visit my shop for a reading. While we were together, she mentioned that she had passed by the place where my friend Margaret, whom she'd never known, had tragically passed away. And I said to her that Margaret's anniversary was this month. Towards the end of Liz's consultation, I chose to finish with a single card from a sealed box, not opened, of Angel Therapy Oracle cards by Doreen Virtue, which were for sale in my shop, but the contents of which I'd never yet seen. I opened the box, shuffled the cards, mixed them, still being unaware of the images on them. Turned the backs of the cards towards Liz while fanning them out, and I asked her to choose one herself. Lo and behold, when she turned it over, she had chosen a card which bore the image of an angelic figure whose halo was shaped as a Celtic brooch design, the same as my Celtic brooch that I'd only put on that day to keep the buttonhole from opening on my blouse, a linen blouse that I had. The brooch had been given to me by Margaret's mother, Margaret that Liz had mentioned some years before. Now, the next image, I am pressing. I'm very pressing. That's Margaret and her mother, obviously before she passed away. So during that same week, a former client who now lived abroad was back in Glasgow visiting family, and she wanted to have another consultation with me. However, I had moved premises since she had last seen me. So I said that I would send her a text message, which I composed some time beforehand for other clients, to explain how to reach my shop. This is an image of an enmeshed text message and a laptop message. So it was just as well that I read the saved message before sending it to this client, because that message on my phone had become corrupted and enmeshed with another very sad and personal message, which I had sent to one of my brothers when Florence had passed away. That's Margaret's mother again, just more than 5 years before. So I don't know if you can read the text message, but it'll sound like gobbledygook. The text message read as follows: if you go down Byers Road and turn right onto Dumbarton Road, carry on till you reach the railway bridge, which is overhead, and immediate hi George, just to let you know Florence passed away at 11:45 a.m. and we're on our ... which referred to 6th of January 2005. On the Thursday of the same week, I opened up my laptop to do some work, and without me having done or touched anything, I told you, Charlie, that I'm sometimes bad with technology. It goes haywire on me. So what happened was I hadn't done anything with my laptop at the time, and I switched it on, and this message came up, and it said, on this date, which is, I think, the lower message, on this date, in 1969, Margaret and her surname, I'm not saying it for confidentiality, died. It was indeed that date, but I have no idea how that managed to appear on my screen, nor how all of those other things, which were all pertinent to each other, coincidentally appeared. These were, in my opinion, all psychically experienced and brought back meaning to me and evidence of spirit communication. Just another wee sip, please. Quite some time after my mum had passed away, I was in my birthplace of Edinburgh visiting my Auntie Mary. She was my second mum, for the day. And in the early evening, at my aunt's suggestion, just as I had been thinking about doing the same thing, I rang Florence to suggest that she and I could go down to Albany Street Spiritualist Church that night, and she agreed. I should say that when Margaret and I first met and became friends, I had no idea that we would turn out to be distantly related to each other, albeit a couple of generations before, and on the maternal lineage of my mum's family, but the paternal lineage of Florence's family. I had noticed when visiting her that Margaret's grandmother had the same surname and spelling as my great-grandmother's maiden name, and both of these families had links to the same district of Edinburgh. However, a family health-related link became apparent when, like my own mum and several others in that lineage, Florence suddenly took rheumatoid arthritis. Well, that night at Albany Street Spiritualist Church, the young medium, whose name I do not recall, but I think I know who he was, delivered a number of messages to people who were present. Then he came to me. I was uncertain as to whether he was indicating me or if it was someone else behind me, but when I turned and looked around me, just looking, is it somebody here? He said, "It's you." I politely thanked him and accepted the most apt and interesting message from Spirit. He said that he had a young girl with him, adding, "She's ages with yourself," and that was interesting in itself because although I was a mature woman by that time, I knew that he was referring to Margaret, who was a year younger than me and still in her teens when she passed. That was true. My mum was due to have a... no, I've missed a bit, sorry. He said that a lady was coming forward with her, and they were both dark-haired and very like each other, adding that the lady had one leg shorter than the other when she passed. Well, that was true. My mum was due to have a replacement knee joint in the 1970s, but strike action, which adversely affected the NHS, was rife at the time, and mum's operation was delayed for so long that her knee joint had badly deteriorated, leaving her only able to have a fused knee. That's the knee joint taken away and the lower and upper leg fused to each other. That made her right leg shorter than the left and required her to have a built-up shoe on her right foot to balance her mobility. The other thing was that I was fair-haired like my dad, but Margaret was dark-haired like my mum, and when anyone who didn't know me came to visit and Margaret was there, they would assume that she was my mum's daughter. Now, if I try this again, that's an image of my mum's engagement ring. After that demonstration of mediumship, Florence and I were going downstairs to the tea room, and she said to me, "Well, there's no doubt who the medium was referring to with those two." And I agreed, but then Florence added, "I don't understand the bit about your mum's ring because you don't have it." I responded that I didn't have my mum's wedding ring because she had always said that she wanted to be buried with her wedding ring, but I had mum's engagement ring. And then Florence said to me, "Why don't you wear it then?" And I replied, "Well, you probably understand more than anyone else would, but I've tried wearing it twice, and the pain and swelling in that finger's joints were unbearable, and it felt like I imagined rheumatoid arthritis to be. And my finger joints were so swollen the next morning that I thought I'd never manage to get the ring off." Florence acknowledged that, but then she said, "Maybe since you've had that message tonight, you should try wearing it again and see what happens." So I did. And I seriously thought that I'd need to get the ring cut off because the pain was excruciating, and my joints on that finger were so swollen that removing Mum's engagement ring seemed impossible. I really had to work on it for such a long time before I managed to remove it, and I've never attempted to wear it again after the third time. However, something clicked with me at that point in time. When Mum was passing to spirit, and one of my brothers and I were sitting at either side of her bed, which just had curtains around it since there was no available single room to move her bed into, I put my head onto the pillow beside her head and I whispered to her, "Give me 3 rings when you get there, Mum," which was what Mum used to say to all of our many visitors to the house over the years as they left to go home. Sometimes 2 or 3 visitors would be leaving at the same time, and they'd say, "But you won't know which one of us is home," to which she'd respond with, "I know how long it takes each of you to get home, and I'll worry if you don't give me 3 rings. Wise woman, my Mum. In that light bulb moment, I reckoned that Mum had been having a much-needed and well-deserved rest since she had reached her home on the other side. She always put others before herself, and this occasion was no different. Knowing how much we all understood the cryptic comments and otherwise indecipherable messages which we shared with each other in our family. I believe that I couldn't have received a stronger message than that, which combined the physical with the psychical from my mum. That's how I've taken it anyway. There was a history of family members hearing a doorbell ring when no one was there, or an alarm clock sounding when it hadn't been set, and they knew just by a way of kenning that someone whom they already knew was passing to spirit actually passed at that point in time, and it still happens to us. I feel that when we acknowledge those inexplicable coincidences, we are honouring the person whom we recognise as being involved in the sharing of that understanding from the other side, whilst at the same time we decipher the deeper meaning all round. Now, I'm sorry, I'm so thirsty. I wasn't well during the week, and I think I've got no liquid left in me. Now, the next one's a kind of fuzzy image. And the person who put the slides together for me said, maybe you've got a clearer photo, but actually I think it's fuzzy because the ring I wore every day since I was 14. I don't wear it now for reasons that will come apparent. But the cameo part just got worn away. Now, when my dad was suddenly taken ill with a heart attack on the 2nd of January 1987, it took well over 3 hours after the doctor called for an ambulance to arrive to take him to the hospital, and my 2 brothers accompanied him to the hospital, and my husband and I went along to be with my mum at home. In fact, we had been ready to leave my Auntie Mary's, where we'd been staying over New Year, when we got the phone call to say Dad was being taken to hospital. Later on, my brothers called to ask if we would meet them to collect my brother that needed to go back to Mum's, which was where he'd been staying for New Year. When I reached the hospital, I went in to see my dad, but when I spoke to him in the babyish broken Polish, and when I spoke to him, he didn't answer, so I spoke to him in babyish Polish, because I never learned Polish as I was growing up. He reacted, and he said, "Jo," which is Kaszubski for yes. Kaszubski is like Gallicas to the Polish language, which pleased me hearing him say yes. So a couple of days later, when we were visiting Dad, he asked if I had seen the Polish nurse. And I said that I hadn't. And when he said that she'd been speaking to him in Polish, I said that I had been speaking to him in Polish, to which he responded quite clearly, "I ken that you were speaking to me in Polish, but I'm speaking about the Polish nurse." Well, I made inquiries, and there wasn't a Polish nurse in the hospital at all, not just not in the ward, not in the hospital. So next day, my husband and one of my brothers were at the hospital with me, and Dad suddenly asked if we could see them. To which, like he said, "Can you see them?" And I replied, "Who?" And pointing out of the window, which was at the side of his bed, he said, "Mama, Papa, and friends." Well, of course, we couldn't see them, but we understood what was coming, and sure enough, his condition worsened and he was taken into a single room. Mum and Auntie Mary managed up to the hospital earlier on in the evening, but during the night, my brother and I remained at the hospital, and my husband went back to Mum's with Auntie Mary because Mum couldn't get about unaided. So we realised that Dad, being Catholic, needed to receive last rites. I'm brought up in a very mixed religion family, and some none at all. But beliefs are very pure. So we realised that Dad, being Catholic, needed to receive last rites, so my brother went to fetch the priest from Dad's Polish church, and he was the worst example of a clergyman that we'd ever met. The way he spoke was most unchristian-like, and my poor brother had yet to take this awful man back to his dwelling. It was really upsetting. As I sat at the bedside holding Dad's hand, he began to rub the cameo ring on my finger, but he was unable to let me know if he wanted anything, and he passed away at 6:15 a.m. on the 6th of January, with me and both of my brothers beside him. When we got back to Mum's, I didn't feel like going to bed right away, so I picked up a 1981 Francis Gay book. I don't know if you know of Francis Gay books, but my mum got one every Christmas from her sister-in-law for a Christmas present. So I picked up the last one that had a Tuesday, 6th of January in it, and it was 1981. So I opened it to see what the reading was. Now, lots of people in days gone by would open a book, any book, but it was usually the Bible, because that was the only book most people had in their houses. And they would open it to see what it said and took that as a message from the other side. So I opened this book at the 6th of January, and I read the reading. So it said, a clergyman and one of his parishioners were walking along side by side, and it was icy underfoot. The parishioner slipped and fell, and the clergyman said to him, "Friend, sinners stand on slippery ground." The parishioner looked up at him and said, "Yes, I see that they can, but I'm afraid I can't." I almost couldn't believe what I was reading, because for me, it convinced me that Dad had been aware of just how awful that man had been, because it was really, and I couldn't tell you all that he said it's so awful, but he was really saying that he wasn't a true Christian. Terrible. So the cameo ring was given to me by Auntie Mary after a holiday that she had in Italy, where she visited where they were made, and I'd worn it constantly, as I said before. On the morning of Dad's passing, we were all at my mum's house, and Auntie Mary had been back at her own house, and the rest of us were sitting around the table when we heard a key turning in the door. Now, loads of people had keys to my mum's house because she couldn't get up to go and answer the door. So I just said, "That's Auntie Mary." And said, "How do you know?" I said, "My cameo ring's just broken," and it had broken at the shank of the ring. I had it fixed 3 times by jewellers, and 3 times it came apart again. So it never kept the soul ring that was done. So needless to say, after all of what I've told you before, we all agreed as a family that this priest could not conduct Dad's funeral. So we got Mum to minister, and he, being a friend and a regular visitor to the house, came to the house. People came to the house and all gathered in the sitting room, and it was the only way my mum would have been able to attend Dad's funeral, so that was interesting. He was quite psychic himself, that minister, actually. So he also did a service at the graveside, and those that couldn't have come to the house went to the graveside. We, my husband and I, returned to our home in Helensburgh in the middle of January to find several burst pipes were flooding our house. It was a terrible winter that year, 1987. And loss adjusters kept us waiting for 16 months, and we still have repercussions from that today. However, a few days after we arrived back to our own home, a dark, damp patch appeared up on the ceiling, up on the wall just under the ceiling, from the water gushing, I suppose. And that damp patch was my grandfather in Poland's face, just as it was in that sepia photo. My 2 brothers came through to see us to see if we needed any help. And they said, "What's that on the wall?" "Well, what do you think it is?" "Grandad." So they saw it as well. However, as they left that evening to go back to Edinburgh, I went back into the house, having seen them off, and my husband standing up in a chair, wiping the mark away. And I said, "I wanted to take a photo of it," but of course cameras were not like today. You'd have them on your phone and everything. I would have had to dig out a camera. He says, "No, that's not staying there." So the image went, but I can assure you it's true. So divination has a prefix di, which is from Latin and signifies 2 of something, such as division, divisive, dichotomy, dilemma, etc. Much the same as coincidence does when 2 options fall into place, even if they're only if they're recognised as such. Now the next image, the daily record on the left-hand side, you can see says "Give peace a chance," and it was actually about the Northern Irish situation at the time. And the newspapers for the next day were available in midnight or just the early hours of the morning. So we were coming back from a gig, and we went in, and Jim got a paper, my husband, and that was the "Give Peace a Chance" one. Later on in the daytime, it was announced that John Lennon had been shot dead, and that was the evening papers. And I thought, there's 3 images of the same paper there, but I thought, how interesting is that? Because "Give Peace a Chance" was obviously his song. So that was something else I wanted to just relate. And of course, it's 2 papers, so here's the DI, divination thing again. I saw that's been very significant. This next slide. I had this gentleman came to my shop to have a reading, and he'd never had a reading before, but one of his neighbours had told him about me and said that he should come and see me. It turned out that his wife had passed away suddenly just a few months before, and he wasn't coping well with it at all. They had no family, they had a dog, and the dog, who was his best friend, was moping about as well. So he came to see me, and I explained to him what I did, and I said, I won't say anything that's not what I sense or feel. I'm not making anything up for you. So that was the reading I did with tarot cards, a 12-card house reading, which is based on the astrology system. And I've taken out part of his name, so he's Ian, that's all I would tell you. His date of birth's obviously there and so on, and also his wife's date of birth. Now, in amongst the cards, it's maybe difficult to see because I scribbled down afterwards, and that's my own notes. But there are cards, 2 of Swords usually indicates some kind of rift in a relationship between 2 people or 2 parties. The 2 of Cups is next to it, which is 2 of Swords is next to it, which is, again, a difficult card, and sometimes refers to a divorce, but a death is like a divorce. It's a bereavement. You're lost without that person. Going round them, there were a few other ones. The Death card is in the 6th house, and in the 7th house, the 6 of Pentacles, which is a lovely card, and it's really about a gift, and it's in the house of the partner. So for me, that signified his wife wanted him to move on with his life and realise that he was his own boss. So there are other things, Ace of Pentacles, the new beginning, 10 of Pentacles, which then is followed by the King, the Knight, King, Queen, Ace. And the Ace is new beginning. 10 is pertinent to the new beginning as well. And the Lover's card. So I knew from what he had said to me and from that Lover's card being there that they were very, very close as partners, and that was why he wasn't able to get over her death. It was just recent as well. I don't know what he was expecting, but it was recent. And he said to me that the thing he missed most was the bacon sandwiches that she made for him to go fishing. Now, I usually finish a reading for anybody with another oracle of some sort. So in this instance, I chose to do Messages from Your Angels by Doreen Virtue. And the angel card that came out was Sonia. So this is a card, Sonia. I couldn't believe what it said. I read that out to the person so that they know that I've not just said what I've said, but here you are. But he picked out the card himself, the same way as I did with the other one that I said earlier on, fanned them out, and the person chooses a card with their left hand next to the heart. So this says, I bring you a message from your deceased loved one. I am happy, at peace, and I love you very much. Please don't worry about me. I thought that couldn't be more apt. So the next image is that message in full. Your heart has been very heavy with grief, and I am here to reassure you. I am a guardian angel to your deceased loved one, and I want you to know that there is no reason for you to worry. It's very blurred, but it was really apt. Your loved one is very happy and has adjusted to the transition very well. There is no anger or upset directed toward you, only love and understanding. You have done nothing wrong, dear one, so please don't blame yourself in any way. You did everything that you could, and your loved one has asked me to share their appreciation with you. In actual fact, he had gone home and found his wife dead in the house, so that's the guilt that he felt, thinking that he could do something about it. You and your loved one share a great deal of love between your souls. This love could never die. Although you miss your loved one in your loved one's physical presence, you have already connected spiritually in your dreams, as well as through feeling, hearing, smelling, or seeing your loved one's essence. Your loved one is alive as you are, even more alive in many ways. Relieved of earthly cares and bodily pains, your loved one is freer and happier than ever. As soon as you complete your life's purpose, and it is your turn to make the transition, you will be reunited in each other's arms. In the meantime, please know that your loved one is with you. And often, couldn't see it because it's squint the card, and that the angels surround you continuously. What I did then was I said to this man, have you got your mobile phone with you? Does it have a camera on it? So I let him copy the reading, the card that he'd chosen, and the message, the longer message on the card. And he was really grateful for that. So the Spirit comes through when you want them to, and the right messages appear when they're needed. That's my thought anyway. Now, the next thing, oh, that was the spread. I should have shown you that as well. Or maybe I did. This is from Google Maps. Now, I used to wear a pair of earrings that were crystal balls. My brother had bought them for me. And I wore them all the time. And this particular day, in West of Scotland Dowsers, which I belong to, we were having a talk round the room. You know, everybody say something about a coincidence or an incident that happened and meant something to you. So I was wanting to talk about my earring, which one of them had come out. Now, I finished a degree at Glasgow University, and I couldn't get to do what I wanted to do after my degree. So I took a job in a call centre, and I stuck it for 8 months, and it was the worst job of my life. I've never done anything so bad. So I was coming home, and I got the train back to Helensburgh from Glasgow. I got off the train, I was frozen, and it was dreich, and I was walking home and feeling miserable. And I got to the door of the house, and I had a habit of sometimes going and checking my earrings. And I checked, my earring. So I said to my husband, I'm going to have to go back round and look for my earring. I've lost it somewhere, and I knew I had it on in the train. He says, you can't go around looking for your earring. And I said, well, I'm going to try. And then I thought, you could phone up the stations at that time. So I phoned the station, and I asked if the cleaner was on the train, could they please look for my earring. It's a wee crystal ball set in a silver setting, and a hanging earring. So the cleaner came and said, no, nothing was found on the train. So I said, I'm going to go out and look for it. So it was dark by that time, and I went out with a wee torch in the rain and going round looking in the street, no sign. See something sparkling, no, it's just a big blob rain. And then I got to this point where you go round from the street I'm on, round there, and there's a corner. And I'd shone the torch on the road, because I'd had to cross the road to get to the station or from the station. And there, embedded into the tarmac on the road, was my earring. So somebody had driven over it since it come out just like 10 or 15 minutes before. So I got my keys out of my pocket, and I dug it out. Now, it had a mark on it from being run over, but I thought, it's still my crystal ball earring, you know, so I got it back. Anyway, I was frightened of losing it again, because the wee ball came out. It obviously stretched the bit that was, I can't remember what you call it, surrounding the crystal ball. So I decided to talk about that incident at the Dowsers meeting. But also there was an added thing to it, that my next door neighbour, were semi-detached, and the next door neighbour had passed away in the interim period. And somebody from round the corner had decided to leave the family home, our parents and that, and buy this house when it went up for sale. And this girl was a teenager when I lost my earring outside her family home. It was exactly there. So I had told her the story about what had happened. And the night that I spoke at the Dowsers, I got out the Dowsers meeting, and we usually go for a coffee. So 2 of the people and myself were going for a coffee that night. And I was getting my stuff into the car that I'd been using, and my husband contacted me, and he says, "Have you looked at your phone?" I said, "I'm just out at the meeting." He says, "Look at your phone, I've sent you something." And it was 2 images of the next door neighbour who had passed away, ghosted out in Google Maps. So I now see another connection. He was a very reserved man, but after his mum passed away, she used to live with him for a long time, and after his mum passed away, he told me that he used to smell her perfume in the house, and yet she couldn't wear her perfume because she had allergies to lots of things. So I found that quite interesting too. Anyway, that was on the night that I talked about my earrings and the new neighbour. That's the first tarot card set that I ever had. They were given to me by a friend who is still a friend, very close, more like family. And he had bought them for himself. And he said to me, "I know you like things to do with the psychic stuff." He says, "Would you like a set of tarot cards?" Yes, I would, because I believed that you were to be given your first set of tarot cards. So that was the one I started off with. And there was hardly anything really in the images. It's the IJJ Swiss Tarot. But I've had umpteen tarot sets since then. And from my shop, I went on to build a hut in the garden, thinking I would do readings for people nearer to home. The shop was getting too expensive, and they were putting parking meters outside. And, sometimes in a reading, you get carried away and you couldn't check the time. That wouldn't be right. So that was my shop, and it's got several symbols in the sign that were to do with the divination tools that I used. And the sign stands at the side of my shed and gets blown over every time it's weather like this. A wee pouch with my tarot cards in it, and that wee box, a wee tin, it's a biscuit tin. That's how I carry my cards and my runes and things about with me if I'm doing a reading for somebody. Now, Mishka should be spelled Myszka. It's Polish. My dad was Polish, as I said earlier, and it means a mouse. Now, that's 2 different totem animal decks, and the one on the left is the North American totem animals, and the mouse is for scrutiny. And on this card it says, "You're overlooking some important details, so pay closer attention to what's going on." So scrutiny, and that's what I believe I do when I'm doing a reading for someone. Now, not much more. That's the Mary Hanson Roberts deck, and when that first came out, I saw it and I thought, I like that. It's smaller cards, much more easy for people to handle, and the images on them are very drawing. They pull you in, and they're like close-ups. It's as if you're doing a close-up of the person who's depicted, or the creature or situation that's depicted. So that's what they are. Now, this one here is the last image that I've got, which is an image of an inscription on this gravestone. And it's quite strange. Archie Roy was the founder president of this SSPR, Scottish Society for Psychical Research. And there's an inscription on that stone that is to the loving memory, in fact, of Archie Roy. Now, people don't know how it's got there. It's never been publicised. I think I do know how it's got there, but I feel I'm always strict with confidential things, and because I don't know for sure, I wouldn't like to say, but I do believe that it was one of his students who got on very well afterwards, and who had that inscribed on the stone. Now, I would try and tell you this as quickly as I can, but after my own mum passed away on Mother's Day 1993, we all had a lot to deal with in the immediate aftermath. And I'll try and rattle through this. So being back at home one Sunday in early April, I said to my husband that I was just going to stay home and relax and read a book, which had been given to me months before by my friend JB. Now, the book was written by Nella Jones, a medium, and by the time I'd finished it, my husband had already gone to bed and was sound asleep, and I wasn't ready to go to sleep yet. So I did something that I can't do these days. I switched on the telly, 1987, and I managed to change the channels, and Melvin Bragg was on, and he was interviewing a Polish composer called Henryk Górecki, and the music of Henryk Górecki was playing, and it overwhelmed me, and I was quite upset about it. And I said aloud, although I was in the room on my own, why do you allow such things to happen? Because the music was interspersed with photos of Auschwitz and things that went on there. It was really quite upsetting. So I then heard outside the window footsteps as if they were going past the house, the door, down the side of the house towards the garage. And I thought, who's that? Because it was really early hours of the morning. So I thought, I don't think my husband got up and went out the door. So I went through to the bedroom and I said, Jim, are you awake? No answer. A wee bit louder, Jim, are you awake? And he stirred and he said, I've just had the strangest dream. I dreamt that I went round to the garage, and as I opened the door, it was full of refugees and prisoners of war. And I just said to them, you can stay here for as long as you like. And I then said to Jim, that's okay, just you get back to sleep. And with a heavy sigh, he was back to sleep again. Now, I know I've got to finish soon, so I'll jump forward to that. I joined the SSPR. I had attended meetings for some time, but I thought it's time to join and, to give something towards this charity. So I started going, and one night there was a talk about the Ganzfeld experiment, Ganzfeld, and the way that they were conducted was that someone was put in a room on their own, put on the teetering on the edge of sleep, and a film or a piece of film that they didn't know what it was going to be was played in another room on a screen. And when they came out of their dozy state, they were to say what they had experienced in that dream state. And invariably, they explained exactly what had been playing on the screen. So to me, I learned years later about the Ganzfeld experiment, and I think that what I experienced was something akin to that, but I had switched on the television myself. So I think I'm at time's up. So thanks for listening, and I hope you've got something out of the talk that I've given today, and maybe your own experiences, you'll feel more comfortable about sharing them with people in the future. So thanks a lot for your time.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mishka.
Thank you.
Has anyone got any questions they would like to ask? Yep.
I want to stop kidding on your 20. It's obvious you've got some gifts there. And your story was lovely. Thanks for sharing that.
Thank you.
I'm just curious, when you became aware of your gifts and developed a bit more understanding with your gifts.
Right, this lady's asking when I became aware of my gifts. I do see them as gifts, but I don't think I'm particularly gifted, but thank you. And the thing is, because I grew up in the family that I grew up in, where the psychic thing was recognised and accepted, on both sides of the family and further outstretching in the, it just was the natural thing. And of course, we didn't blab to other people about it, but we did speak within the family about our experiences. And with the thing about hearing a bell ring or anything like that, I mean, when my mum was young, obviously, there were no telephones or anything like that. And my mum's younger sister had been taken into hospital with TB meningitis. And my grandfather and my mum were getting their coats on to go up to the hospital to visit her. And the doorbell rang, and it was one of those in a tenement stair where you pull the bell ringer out and it goes back in on a kind of elasticated chain. And you open the door and the person's there. There was no one there. And my granddad said, we might as well take our coats off and have a cup of tea because it's going to be a long night. And right enough, she had passed away at that time. And there's lots of experiences of that kind of thing happening. In my uncle's case, my mum's brother, when my mum passed away, he said, can I just ask what time your mum passed away at? And I said, it was 2:25 in the afternoon. And he said to my aunt, his wife, he said, I told you, Mary, he said, I told you it was significant. And what had happened was, he was retired by that time, but he hadn't set his alarm, but his alarm went off at 2:25 in the morning. So it was like a 12-hour interval. And that again is something that happens. So numbers, a lot of people pay attention to numbers, and like 1111, there's a book about 1111, it's quite interesting actually. And I do that, but a lot of people do it now because of the digital numbers on the screen, you know, which are different from the clock going round. So I think the 12-hour difference thing is still significant. But I didn't have tarot cards before I got those ones given to me, you know, because as I say, I believed that you should be given those things. So that's like being given a gift, and you use it or you lose it. Yeah. So thanks for your question.
Any other questions for Mishka?
You might just be wanting to get on with the next speaker, and I appreciate that.
No. If you do think of any, remember there will be a question and answer session at 6 o'clock onwards. So, excellent. Thank you very much for a very interesting talk there, Mishka.
Thank you all very much.